Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence Independent Media production. Today we are doing part 2 of felt strip muffling. This time, big bass drum. So a couple episodes ago, we were doing my little bass drum, which is 18 inches, and we did felt strips on both sides and a couple of other iterations. Today we're doing a 24, which is a whole different animal, still super cool with nothing inside of it and just the felt strips. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, ProMark by D'Addario, for keeping us in sticks. Today I'm using a Select Balance 5A Rebound Acorn tip, which is kind of my, if I'm playing backbeat music all night, sort of stick, because it's a little longer than my other favorite stick, the SD2, and it has a little more definition on the cymbals because it's hickory and the tip's a little bit bigger. We got a 14-inch deep, 24-inch diameter, thin shelled maple drum, my GMS, which you may have seen from previous videos. So structurally, it's actually really similar to the other drum, except for the size is super different. So when you're dealing with an 18, the range of what you can get away with in any scenario is just a little bit narrower when you're talking about muffling, because there's not that much real estate and there's less air moving. With a 24, you can really put a lot of stuff in there and still get a great sound, which sometimes I think is why pillows became a thing in the first place, because, you know, back when rock music was becoming rock music, it was a lot of larger bass drums, and there are a lot of guys now who maybe have 20s, and you can kind of destroy the tone and the fatness of them pretty fast versus a drum of this size. We're using the same exact heads as the 18, which are coated G12s, one-ply coated 12 mil, and I love these heads. They're fantastic. They make a great reso head too. And today they're on both sides, and we are starting out, we started at the intro there with felt on both sides of the drum, so this is the most muffled that we're going to get. Just to reiterate from the last video, when I do wide open, one felt, two felts, all that stuff, the tunings are not identical because I'm tuning for a sound. I'm not just tuning to a pitch and then seeing what the felt does. So right now, they're close in pitch, they're not the same pitch, and they are also what I would call kind of in the mid-range of what makes sense to me with felts on both sides. If you haven't seen our previous video talking about this drum and what I use it for and how I tune it and kind of work with the sound, my normal thing is a clear EQ3 batter and then a ported EQ3 reso, and I use 2 EQ pads inside of it. So what I do is I basically, because there's Velcro on both sides, I stack them. And that way you can get the big side of one of them on the batter and then reverse the other one and get the big side of that on the reso. And that speaks to how much air is moving when you hit a drum this size. Because if you just put one in there, it takes off like 5%. But for some reason, when you put 2 in there, and this was, who showed me this? Billy Ward, I think this was his thing. Or at least it was at a clinic I saw, it made all the difference in the world, because a little more muffling on the front head of a drum like this can really make it usable in a lot more scenarios. And, you know, sometimes when I show up with this in larger clubs, the first thing the sound man looks for is like the port in the front head for starters, and then making sure that I've got stuff inside of it, because they can be super hard to control if you don't follow a couple of guidelines. Now, on the flip side of that, felt strips on both sides is actually a fairly sizable difference from no felt strips, as you'll see in a moment. And you can get away with this in a mic'd situation. I think of it more as an unmic'd or recording kind of special scenario type of choice for a drum this size, because it's a big sound. But basically, there are options no matter the size of the drum, and I want to make sure people don't just think in terms of a pillow inside or not, because there is something in between, and that's kind of what we're getting at here. So the first thing we're going to do is take all of the felt strips out and tune it up completely wide open and just kind of see what happens when there's nothing in there except for the heads. Well, what to say about that? It sounds enormous, and from where I'm sitting, like I feel like I'm playing in a balanced way based on where I'm sitting, how I would normally play, but the bass drum is just like a whole lot louder than normal. There's not a whole lot else to say other than that this kind of tuning takes up a lot of sonic space and a lot of low end, so it might not be the best for up-tempo stuff, which is why we're kind of doing down-tempo demos today. And also, there's a lot of overtones. So when you're going to compress the kit after this, like if the overheads are going to be compressed or if there's maybe room mics, it's something to take into consideration, basically, because anything you do along those lines, this thing is going to blow up in those mics because it's making so much sound, it's moving so much air. And then the last thing is burying the beater really takes a lot of the tone out of the drum. You can totally do it, but I've definitely had people hit drums that I had set up this way and been like, wow, it doesn't have any low end. And it was just because they were pressing the beater in. And again, that type of playing is for a certain sound and a certain style, and having no muffling at all makes that sort of approach a little bit trickier to get a good sound out of the drum. And it also doesn't feel awesome because you're getting all of that kind of like racket coming back through the drum because it's trying to resonate. So it feels a little weird if you're used to more of like a low tuning with pillow muffling kind of scenario. So this to me is a special occasion tuning, definitely a studio tuning. If you're doing this live, the felt strips really make it easier to control. And it's worth noting, though, that some people use auxiliary bass drums. Stanton Moore, for instance, comes to mind, some other people. And if you're using it as an effect or just some of the time, it makes all kinds of sense. You might still have to put some stuff on it. You might have to put gaff tape on it, or I don't know, maybe one felt strip. But wide open in a studio, on the other hand, in a controlled environment where you're trying to get that sound on purpose, is super cool. And also as an overdub. It's way fun as an overdub. All right, next up is batter side felt, front side no felt. Okay, one side muffled, batter side. It's not a ton different than the last one, but it's definitely different. There's a little more point on the note. And one thing that I noticed about this is that I left the reso alone, same pitch as before. I didn't change it at all. However, I pitched up the batter side a little bit with the felt strip. And if I'd done that before, then the sort of main overtone of the batter head would have been a little more pronounced, and it might have gotten a little pitchier, or at least been kind of annoying on this side of the drum to listen to. So putting a felt strip on this side has allowed me to get a little more oomph and a little more low end out of it right on the impact, rather than just in the sort of bloom of the note afterward. So it's immediately a more usable thing. It's still out of control and ridiculous and huge and deafening. It's shaking everything in here. But the physical sensation of playing it is a little more manageable. I've noticed with felt strips that you can bump the pitch of both of the heads up a little bit from where makes sense when there's nothing at all in the drum, and get this amazing sound, which, to me, like, it makes me think of big band music, actually, because they used really large drums back then, routinely 24, even 26-inch bass drums sometimes, but they were all pitched up. And it's the same thing with John Bonham, like big drums, 14, 16, 18, 26, but tuned a lot higher than you would think. And part of that is for projection. But then, since the drums are so big, you can still stay in the pitch range that you would want to have for rock music, but be able to get it up there to where you have that nice kind of tactile sensation, including the bass drum. So now the next move is to flip it, put it on the front only, and see if that's usable. really like this one a lot. The thing about it that is fun for me is that it's still more controlled than the overall completely empty sound, but this feels more like that first one felt because the batter head hasn't been messed with at all. It's still just all by itself. So there's a ton of overtones on this side of the drum. And then the sound that the mic is getting is a little more clear, a little more usable, mixable, maybe than a totally wide open drum. And we were just talking about this. The situation with this, when you switch which side the muffling is on, is you're defining whether the overtones you're hearing are a result of the impact or a product of the resonance of the drum. So if we muffle the overtones in the batter head, but then we listen to overtones or receive them from the resonance side, it's not the impact necessarily that's making those. It's sort of like a result of everything else that's happening. And with this, the overtones are immediate, and it gets a little more of like a concert bass drum kind of sound. It's a little overtony, kind of trashy, a little like makes me think of like almost, again, like I said before, like a Beastie Boys record in the previous video, but even more so with the drum this size. And the sound of this actually carries like crazy too. When you think about like the design of marching bass drums, for instance, larger diameter, shallower, much like this drum is, just a super fun sound to use. So the last thing we have is to put the felts on both sides, which the demos at the top of the video were. So we're going to just kind of swing back to that sound, which is as muffled basically as we would get with single felt strips on each side. So we're back where we started at the intro, which is felts on both sides. It's a great sound. I didn't try to match the sound of the intro exactly because there's a lot of different ways you could tune the drum in this method. I experimented when I was setting it back up like this again with going a little bit higher on both the heads or trying it super low. And this is just where I ended up because it felt nice and it sounded good right here. You can really experiment a lot with this. You can do a lot of different pitches. You can experiment with the placement of the felts. On a drum this size, the placement doesn't make as much of a difference as on the 18, which we talked about in an earlier video. But also the width of the felt, the thickness of it, all of that stuff can change things an awful lot. And experimentation is the only way to find out what your drum's going to do with this sort of scenario, especially with the way that you play. You know, everyone's technique is different. Everyone's dynamics are different. I'm not hitting super hard in here today, but I could use this playing very, very hard. And it still works, but it might change how you tune it or where you place the felt, that kind of thing. Now let's go back and listen seamlessly through from no felts to all the felts. So thanks again for watching and listening to us horse around with all this stuff. And please like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the little bell next to subscribe down there so you get our notifications. Please let us know if you use felts, if you use two felts, or if you use, heads that have felts attached, any of those kinds of things. We're always curious about how people are getting their sounds. Thanks again to presenting sponsor ProMark by D'Addario for the sticks and all the help with this stuff. And yeah, go out there and have fun with felts.